And for those of you who are guests, hey, somebody brought you here and paid for your lunch. Fill out the card. Well, now here's Mike Summer to introduce our guest. Our speaker today is Democratic candidate for Governor Tom Wolf. Governor Tom Corbett was our speaker last week. Tom is no stranger to most of us in this room, nor to our club. In fact, he used to be one of our members. Tom is a York County native and son of Rotarian and club past president Bill Wolf, down front here. And Tom is well known in our community as the former president, the CEO, and current executive chairman of the Wolf Organization, and perhaps better known to our local non-for-profits as a generous donor. Wolf sold his company, the Wolf Organization, in 2006, and went on to serve as Pennsylvania Secretary of Revenue in Governor Ed Rendell's cabinet, April 2007 through November 2008. At that point, Tom was considering running for governor in the 2010 election cycle, but decided after careful thought that he could not in good conscience do that while his former company, the Wolf Organization, and its employees struggled through the effects of the Great Recession. As mentioned, Wolf left state government towards the end of 2008 and bought back into the Wolf Organization, dedicating his personal time and his personal funds to reestablish the company to profitability. As a non-traditional candidate coming from a difficult part of Pennsylvania to win a Democratic primary, Wolf shocked the party, winning 58% of the vote in a four-person field. His next closest opponent received 18% of the vote. As a candidate to serve as our governor, Wolf believes in four core areas. Level the playing field. He would focus on creating jobs and strengthening the middle class by promoting policies that are fair to the middle class. He would also focus state government on preparing for the 21st century jobs. Tom would place a top priority on one of the most important functions of government, making sure Pennsylvania's educational system is second to none. He would also take advantage of the innate strengths of Pennsylvania's economy. Wolf would push to place Pennsylvania in its unique position as a connector between critical sectors of the economy and major population areas. And fourth, use our natural resources to our full advantage. Tom believes Pennsylvania should take advantage of its traditional energy resources to jumpstart the new energy economy, and modernize infrastructure. As governor, Tom states he will use all of his life experiences to build a strong middle class and a bright future for Pennsylvania. Same disclosure as last week. There will be a question and answer session following Tom's remarks. I ask only members of this club ask thoughtful questions, and I respectfully ask that you leave any political statements to yourself. Tom is joined here by his wife Frances, down front. Hi Frances. And his mother, unfortunately, is sick, but would otherwise be with us, and of course his father Bill joins us. For our Rotarians and guests, please warmly welcome candidate for governor, Tom Wolf.
It's really nice to be back here. And I would just like to say I haven't really done any research in this, but I really don't think there's any significance to the fact that we had turkey last week. I really don't. But I do want to say hi. For me, it's great to be home. It's great to come home. And I've been up here a number of times when I was building my business, when I was a member of this club. And I would always start off by saying, hi, Mom and Dad. And so my mother is sick. My dad is here. I want to say, hi, Dad. How you doing? And I also want to say hi to my wife, Frances. I really appreciate your being here, and the rest of my family who's here too, Frank. It's good to see you. This is really an exciting time for me. I mean, I'm doing something that I figured most York Countyans wouldn't think about running for governor, certainly not as a Democrat, but here I am. And one of the things that I've found in this, I am new to this, I haven't done this before obviously, but one of the things that happens inevitably in this kind of process is that you get defined by others. And that's an interesting thing for me. So it's good to be back where actually people know me and where I can reaffirm who I am And I can tell you that I am who I've always been. I haven't changed. So that's what I want to talk about today. For all the talk, I'm still Corny and Bill's son. For all the talk, I'm still Francis's husband. I'm still Sarah and Kate's father, and I'm still a kid from York County. So that's who I am. So that's what I want to talk about. So let me start with a review of my bio. I did start out my life here. Actually, I keep saying this, but I actually live right now in the house I came home to from the hospital. And there I ended a sentence without a preposition. But it's the house that was built by my great-great-grandparents. It's the house he grew up in. It's the house of my grandparents. Earl was also a member of this club. And I'm proud of the fact that I have moved exactly this far from where I started my life. And I'm proud of having grown up in the town I did, Mount Wolf. Now I know politicians are supposed to come out with some sort of hard-scrabble example of life. You know, somehow they struggled to make sure that they got to where they overcame great challenges. I got to tell you, I had a great childhood. And I know that's a terrible thing to say. I really, really enjoyed growing up here in York County, and I had great parents and a great family surrounding me. But I wanted to see what the world was like. So I left here, went off to, among other things, Dartmouth College. After a year there, I dropped out. I decided I didn't want to do what other college students were doing at that point. Now, I was also in Naval ROTC at the time, and I was, midshipman 4th class. I can guarantee you there were no other midshipmen going off to the Peace Corps, dropping out of college. So I was unusual, but I did that. And I spent 2.5 years in a remote village in India. Actually, this club has a banner from the Gubernatorial Orissa India Rotary Club because he brought it back from India when he and Mom came to visit me when I was in the Peace Corps. I was 19 when I left. We celebrated my 21st birthday together in India, and I think you still have that banner, I hope.
Sure.
The only Gubernatorial banner outside of the I can guarantee you.
Just don't ask for it to find it.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I came back to Dartmouth. I finished Dartmouth and decided I was going to be an academic. So I went off to the University of London after finishing Dartmouth, and then came back and got a PhD at MIT. Now you're thinking I went to MIT with Jim Anderson, so like him, I'm somebody who's really good at science. I stink at science. I do. People ask me what I got my PhD in at MIT, and I say I got a PhD in science. Then I say political science. But listen. No, let me explain. The reason I went to MIT was because MIT, back in the 70s, every social science was trying to pretend they were physics. And so they had to do all this elegant mathematics, and you had to really understand advanced mathematics. And so where else would you go? I went to MIT, and I had a wonderful, wonderful experience. I learned all the mathematics and realized that actually the more elegant the mathematics and social science anyway, the less interesting the questions are. So I wrote my dissertation in English, the 600-page dissertation, and it won the National Dissertation Award. It did. And I think the reason was because it was the only dissertation the folks could read. But I did that, and I had this great career in academia laid out for me. And once again, just like I did when I was at Dartmouth, I decided I don't think I want to do the usual thing. And so much to the consternation of my professors at MIT, I came back to York County. I was actually drawn back to York County. Drawn back because this is an amazing place. And after going all around the world, I realized, I hate to say this, it sounds so true, but there really is no place like home. It wasn't that. There's no place like York County. And so I came back for that, and I came back to be with my family, and I came back to get involved in the family business. And I did that. I started driving a forklift. I was the only PhD forklift operator in York County at the time. But if you're in the building products business, it's a little bit like riding a bicycle. You can't read about it. You can't study it in some course. You have to actually do it. And so that was where you started. I started driving a forklift. I became a truck driver. I was a sales clerk. If I'm elected governor of Pennsylvania, I will be the first governor in the history of the state ever to have managed a True Value hardware store. That's different. So I did that. Anyway, worked my way up in 1986. Bill Zimmerman and George Hodges and I, two cousins, decided to borrow a lot of money. I know borrowing money is a theme in my campaign, to buy the company. And that's what we did. Of course, my father can't say anything here. We obviously paid too much for that company. I'm just saying, I have to buy it. really proud of what we did over the next 20 years. Bill and George and I, working with our employees, built that company from a really good, substantial company right at the heart of this economy and this community to one that was actually big, a $400 million company, and in 13 states, one of the largest building products distribution companies in the United States. I was very proud of that. But I was even prouder of two other things. I was prouder of the way we built that company. It was with our employees. And I keep saying, and have said this many times even here, that we shared 20 to 30% of our net profit with our employees in a profit sharing plan. I take great pride in that. Of course, he's the one who came up with the idea, Republican Bill Wolf, because it works. And I'm proud of the fact that we did that on top of great compensation, great benefits, and I think a great workplace in a great industry. But I'm also proud of the fact that I was deeply involved in the life of this community. I was chair of the United Way of York County. I was chair of the Chamber of Commerce. Carl New is not here to talk about this, but I think I was the only Democrat ever to have chaired the York County Chamber of Commerce. Is that true? Amazing. York College of Pennsylvania, Dr. Gunnar Smith is here from York College. You are here, right? Where? Okay. And I was very proud of that, and obviously served with George Gladfelder on the search committee that brought Pamela to town. Really proud of that. Chair of the York County Community Foundation. Now I say I was chair of the York County Community Foundation back when it was a really good organization. We didn't really do much. We didn't have much money. Now it's a very active organization and actually has a lot of assets. We met twice a year, I think, when I was chair. It was really fun. But I take credit that I was chair of the York County Community Foundation. I was chair of Better York. President, I think, was the title for 12 years. I was also chair of WITF. I was on the board of Christmas Addicts. Bob, you're still here. You usually leave early. Do I have power or what? I was also on the board of the Jewish Community Center and was chair of the most recent capital campaign, co-chair with Tim Grumbacher, which, by the way, was successful, I want to say. So I was very proud of that. I was also lay leader of my church in Mount Wolf, chairman of the administrative board, chair of the finance committee. And I was also, I think, I am most proud of my family. Francis and I raised two really wonderful daughters. Unfortunately, neither of them live in Pennsylvania. I'm going to change that, but wonderful, wonderful daughters. Anyway, in 2006, we sold the business. Both George and Bill and I, the three of us, were all ready to retire. And so we found a way to sell the business in a way that didn't disrupt the lives of our employees, our community, our customers, and the only three people who lost their jobs as a result of that transition was Bill, George, and me. Pretty much the idea. Anyway, at that point, I was retired, and I was looking back on my life, and I was very proud of it. And that was the point when it was disrupted, when Ed Rendell asked me if I would become Secretary of Revenue in his cabinet. And I think having gone through that long, drawn-out story of my life, I built a resume that I was proud of, and I think, you could be forgiven for understanding why he chose me to be Secretary of Revenue. That's right, I was the only Democrat in York County he knew who owned a necktie. I was serious. No, cheer. So anyway, but I did that, and I got to Harrisburg, and I got to say, with all the dysfunction that we talked about, I got to Harrisburg. It was sort of a public service for me. I didn't take any of the benefits of the perks. I keep talking about that. I paid my own way in state business, contributed my salary back to charity, because this was going to be sort of hold your nose and do public service kind of thing. I was enthralled by what I saw. All the things I enjoyed doing, things in this community, working in the trenches here in York County, I saw people doing on a much grander scale, but trying to do the right things by communities and lives up in Harrisburg. Was there dysfunction? Yes. Were there people who weren't doing it? Yes. But there were a lot of people who were and are. And I was taken by that, and so that's why, as Mike said, I decided to run for governor. Never done that before, but put together a campaign team. And I was going to wait till after the Obama inauguration in January of 2009 to announce. I didn't want to rain on his parade, but it wasn't that fun. But anyway, so at that time, actually we were in our hotel room in Washington, got a phone call from some former associates at Wolf who said, 2006 might have been a good time to sell the company, but not a great time to buy it. And the recession that occurred in 2008, which, by the way, I know you've seen the ad, I did not cause that recession in 2008 personally. But there was a recession, and it really was not kind at all to the building products business, the residential construction industry. We were smack dab in the middle of it. And so they were really in tough times. In fact, they were not able to pay the bank principal and interest payments. So Fran and I, without hesitating, said we're going to have to go back. So suspended the campaign, took everything we had taken out of the company, put it back in, got Bill and George to put some money back in, even got the private equity firm that had bought the company to put some money back in, and we bought the company back. Now I want to say at 100 cents on the dollar. Now I have some good lawyer friends who say, well, you obviously didn't have good representation if you did that. But did it at 100 cents on the dollar, and over the next 3-4 years, built it back to profitability. Changed the business model completely from being a distributor of building products to being one that designs, sources, finds manufacturing for home products, kitchen cabinets, decking, and railing. We found manufacturers in the United States to make them to our specifications, put the Wolf name on them, and we have now been able to grow. We're in 30-some states, and we continue to grow and create new jobs, manufacturing jobs actually, in the United States. And it's allowed me to go back and do what I thought I'd never be able to do before, and do again, and that is run for governor. Now, I know that's a long story, that's a shaggy dog story, but what I want to do today is say that in all those things, most of those things spent growing up and living in York County have taught me a few things that, if I win this, I'm going to bring to public service. And this is about York County. There are 4 things I want to talk about. Pragmatism. I think pragmatism in politics, what I've found, same as in life, pragmatism trumps theory or ideology or dogma in dealing with challenges. That's the first thing. Second thing is leadership requires accountability. Third thing is life requires self-reliance, but a recognition that cooperation is sometimes necessary. And fourth, in the real world, integrity actually matters. So let me just go through those things, and I'm going to give you credit for allowing me to see that this is the way life really works. And I think this is the way our politics ought to work. Pragmatism. In everything I've done, in every challenge I've taken on, I've figured that these things can only be addressed in a practical way. I mean, that's not a theory, that's just the way it works. When I came back to my business, I didn't think about whether there was a Republican or a Democratic way to fix the Wolf organization. I just figured, we're going to fix it. And that's what I looked at. It was a practical way. I thought about the practical way to do it. When I was in a leadership position at the United Way, as chair of the campaign or chair of the board, I didn't think about whether there was a left or a right, a liberal or a conservative way to solve a problem. It was, what are we going to do to solve this particular problem and get to where we need to get? And I learned that there. I learned that in every other organization I was in. I relied on pragmatism, not theory, to succeed. And when I tried to assess a situation that was in any context, even in those fields in Orissa in India, I didn't rely on theory, I relied on pragmatism, practical values. That was what is important. That was important throughout my life. I think it's important in politics. It's so York County. Accountability. Second, every job I've had, from Peace Corps volunteer to truck driver to store manager to CEO of the Wolf organization to Secretary of Revenue, I had to deliver results. I couldn't say that it was somebody else's fault here. I had to make tough decisions. But I also had to make decisions that worked. I couldn't say, I'm going to make tough decisions and everybody would give me a pass. I had to make tough decisions, absolutely, but they had to work. So if they didn't work, guess what? It was my fault. If they didn't work, there was no hiding. If they didn't work, there was no finger pointing, no delusions about why they didn't work. There was no excuses. Can I say there was no excuses? That's so York County. Third thing, self-reliance and cooperation. I had to figure things out, or I had to find somebody who could figure things out. I think I first learned this when I was growing up in Mount Wolf. And I'm not disparaging this. We organized the life out of our kids. Francis and I did that for our kids. When I was growing up, I never thought I'd say that. Actually, now I'm old enough, I can say, when I was a boy. But we used to, get together, and before we could play baseball, we had to figure out how to make a baseball field. You just had to figure that stuff out. It's self-reliance, but then you work together, and once you figured out, you had to do it. No one else was going to do it for you. When I was in the Peace Corps, I learned that in a big way. I remember I had to figure out how to survey a plot. I am not a civil engineer. Figure out a plot of land for irrigation, and I had to learn how to use a dumpy level to survey it, to do a contour map. And I taught myself how to do that. Now, I don't know whether that, I did the right thing, I did the best job I could, but I knew that I had to learn that. When the motor was broken, I figured out how to fix it. And that's the kind of self-reliance I think that I learned here in York County. You just do it. You don't sit around and wait for somebody else to do it. And if you can't do it, you go out and find somebody who can, and you appreciate the skills that that person brings to it. This was true of the Peace Corps. It was true of what I did in academia. I got a lot of prizes and awards at MIT, but they were earned by a lot of people helping me do what I did. In business, that was true. In public service, it was true. And certainly in everything I did in community service in New York, self-reliance was important. I was in charge. I was responsible, but I had to work with other people, and I needed to, and I wanted to. That's really important. Every capital campaign I ever chaired worked. It worked. They worked. Partly because I led well, but mostly because I had good people working for me. That's self-reliance, the cooperation. Everything I figured out in business, I figured out on my own or working with other people. Again, that is so York County. Finally, integrity. This is one that I think we don't take full account in our own lives, but it matters. It matters here in York County, but it really matters in the real world. In this world, just as in this community, integrity really does matter. Success is about relationships. It's about relationships built on trust. Now, in our business, and I don't know how you work, and I understand that there are some attorneys in the room here, but let me say that in my business, we have a lot of huge contracts with people who are manufacturing our stuff to our specifications. We don't have any contracts. We do these things on a handshake, and on trust, and on relationships. And that's the way it's supposed to work. It works really, really well for us. This is a 170-year-old company that's built itself basically on the basis of trust. Integrity often seems to be an elective in life, an elective good, one of those things that maybe is nice to have, and certainly something that we trot out at campaign time. But the background I have, growing up here, doing what I've done in my life, it actually matters. It works. It's practical. Success in the long run can't happen without integrity. That's a concept that is so York County. So now, I'm no longer trying to serve just the York County community. I've actually grown wings, and I'm trying to get into a broader sphere here, and I'm not sure if it's going to work. But if it does, I'm going to bring a lot of York County with me. The things that I learned here, those are the things that I'm going to bring to that life. And what the things that I think work here, I'm pretty sure they work all around Pennsylvania. And that's what I'm going to try to bring to that job. So I am who I am. I built a great life. I built a great family. Actually, Francis and I built a great family, a great business, and I've had a great time in my life as a Peace Corps volunteer, as an academic, as a business owner, as a community servant. All the great things I've really enjoyed. But I'm really proud of where I come from, and I want to tell you that. Because of all the things I've done, and maybe of all the things I might achieve, I am still Bill and Corny's son. I'm still Francis's husband, Katie and Sarah's father, and a kid from York County. Thank you. Questions? Any questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Jim, come on up.
I've mentioned this to you before. We talk a lot about putting money in education, and my comment is that we put more money in education in this country like 28 to 50 times than any other place on earth, and yet we're kind of down at the bottom. Now, Pennsylvania, the last Wall Street Journal poll, was not one of the better places in the country. But my concern is not that we shouldn't spend money on education. I think, and what I'd like to say is, would you be aware or look at the education that's going on in India, Japan, a lot of other places that put kids, have a much higher level degree of challenge, let's say, and they come out of school, public school, at a presumably higher level of knowledge than what our kids are forced to do.
Yeah, that's a
I think
good.
it's quality, not money.
Not money. Everybody heard the question. That was Jim Anderson. Jim is asking the question, you know, is how can we deliver on a good, high-quality education in this country? It's not just about money. It's about, you know, more than that, and I understand that. And so let me be clear on where I stand, because a lot of what you talk about in these campaigns is money. And I understand that you can't throw money at any problem, certainly not at education. But I think we also have to acknowledge that you can't keep disinvesting in education and get to a good outcome. And if we're, in the end, this is the practical aspect of it. It's not dogma, it's not philosophy, it's just what you have to do. And if you believe, as I do, that education is central to what we do in a limited government democracy, government is supposed to set the table for private sector growth. That's what a government is supposed to do. And one of the things the government does in a free market economy is, in setting the table, is making sure that we're providing the public goods that we need to provide. One of the, maybe the chief, not maybe, the chief public good we provide is education. We depend on it. And it's not just a local thing. It's not one thing that we can say, hey, most of the kids get a good education. Most kids actually do. But our Constitution says every child shall receive a thorough and efficient education in Pennsylvania. And the people in Harrisburg need to follow through on that promise. And that means we've got to recognize that there are different ways to get to the end. We've got to recognize that what works in the city of York is not going to work in northeastern York County where our daughters went to school. Any Bobcats here? No, all right. I'm always self. But I understand we've got to have different methods, and we've got to be open to innovation. I believe we have some good charter schools. Francis was one of the people who helped found the York Academy, which is an international baccalaureate school partnership between York Suburban, York City, and Central School Districts. And there are innovative ways and new ideas that we ought to be looking at to make sure that we're following through in every zip code on the promise of a thorough and efficient education. So the next governor needs to recognize that money is not the answer to that issue, the challenge of delivering on that promise. But I think we all need to recognize that taking money away is not going to solve the problem either. Any other questions? Yes. Hey.
Hi. Tom, some months ago when you visited us at the Salvation Army, you mentioned that a vision of yours was that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania would be a leader among the states in the nation. And so I'm curious to hear what is the first and most important thing that you would do to further that goal, if I quoted you correctly?
Yeah.
And since we're pragmatists in the room, as you pointed out, how would you do it?
Okay, now remember, I do have this academic pedigree, so I talk too much. I'm sorry, that is but anyway, I did not mean to disparage academics. There are two things there. First of all, let me just say the first thing I do, I think one of the things, this campaign is about specific policies, as every campaign is, but I think we need to recognize that it's also about Pennsylvania, and it's also about the democratic tradition that I think every public servant needs to understand he or she is a steward. We need to make sure that we're engendering trust rather than just destroying it. And so the first thing I would do is address the issue, one of the key issues that I think is an issue with democracy, and that is trust. We don't have it. My primary election was great. I mean, Mike said I got a 40% margin of victory in a four-way race. I won every county in Pennsylvania. You know what the turnout was? Turnout was in the teens of eligible voters. The statistics so often used in Pennsylvania is percentage of registered voters, which I think was in the 20s, but of eligible voters was in the teens. At the same time we went to the polls, May 20th was the election, primary election here in Pennsylvania. India was voting in general elections. India has been a democracy since the late 40s. The United States has been a democracy since 1789. And we had, in the teens, India had a turnout in that election of over 60% of eligible voters. Some of those people had to walk miles across dirt roads to get to the polling booth. We didn't have to do that, and yet we had in the teens. So the first thing we need to do is work to bring democracy back to this country and create a system that people trust. and that voters and citizens say, I think this actually matters to me. Because 18% suggests a lot of people don't think this matters. When it comes to Pennsylvania, I think there's something else we ought to recognize. We are, and I keep saying this, a modest bunch. Pennsylvania is a really amazing state. And if you, just do a mind experiment, if you had somebody from outer space, a very objective person, come and was asking you the question, where does Pennsylvania stack up in all the states in the United States? And you'd say, because you're Pennsylvanian, you'd say, shucks, yeah, we're a regular state. But think about it. Take 50 sheets of paper out and start writing on each sheet the attributes of each of the states of this country. And think of what you put on that paper, that page for Pennsylvania. This place was founded by William Penn. It was founded on the basis of freedom of conscience. This nation was started in Pennsylvania with the Declaration of Independence signed and drafted and signed right here in Pennsylvania. We've had two constitutions, the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution of 1787. Both were drafted in Pennsylvania. Of course, the Articles right here in New York. Right? So I've been saying that to everybody I tell them. We have two world-class cities. We have the location to die for. We have some of the most beautiful natural scenery in the world. We've had natural resources from agricultural land to coal to crude oil to timber to now natural gas. We have some of the greatest universities in the world. If somebody from outer space were looking at all the states in the world, in the country, and you were to say, you were to ask that person, that alien, which of these do you think dominates the United States? He or she would have to say, Pennsylvania. No, we haven't. And we haven't because we allow our modesty to keep us from thinking that we ought to have higher expectations of ourselves. We've had one president born in Pennsylvania, James Buchanan. He was a Democrat. Come on, we can do better than that. And I think that has to start with somebody who stands up and says Pennsylvania is capable of doing so much more than we are doing. We should be a dominant player in this country. And I think in this election, I'd like to do over a 4-year period if I win, maybe 8, but certainly 4, stand up and actually preach the gospel of Pennsylvania. And starting with Pennsylvanians to say, we are capable of doing so much more than we're doing. We are a great state. We're a great people. So ethics would be my first thing. I can do that with executive orders. Unfortunately, I can't get us to feel great about our state with an executive order. But I'm going to, if I win, I'll do my best to make sure we recognize our greatness and we have expectations that are in line with that greatness. Any other questions? Yes?
I hesitate to do this, but I think we have to address the other elephant in the room, and that's pension reform.
Did you say elephant? I thought you were my friend. Seriously, he actually wrote me a check. Okay. You're out. That's it.
As I understood it, you brought pension reform to your own company. Therefore, you must have thought it was the right thing to do for your employees. I don't know when you did that, before 2006 or after 2008. But my question is, when do we bring pension reform to the municipalities and the state all around it? Do we wait till we go bankrupt, or do we do it under courageous leadership before we get to that point? So I don't think we can continue paying increases in pensions at 7 or 8% when you're only earning 3 to 4. Right.
No, it's an excellent point. And by the way, just for the, we had a defined benefit plan when I left. The defined contribution plan was put in when I was away. But I thoroughly approve of it because it was done for 2 reasons. One, it was actually an increase in the benefit to our employees. And second, one of the things we had with the defined benefit plan was ours was a non-contributory plan, which meant that the employees put nothing into it. But we uniquely gave each of our employees the ability to do a lump sum withdrawal when they left the company. Now the problem with that was that it encouraged, actually, because it was a good plan, it is a good plan, it encouraged employees to leave the company, good employees, because they needed the cash, and so they would quit in order to qualify for the lump sum payout. So the 401k plan actually created more money. The company actually puts money in, not matched. Just you get a certain percentage of your income that comes in. If you want to put some in yourself, pre-tax, we'll match that. And if you're an older employee who would have been hurt by the transition from a defined benefit to a defined contribution plan, we actually add even more for that. So the benefit is actually much richer now than it was. And so I think it's a good plan. So it was not done with the goal in mind of economizing. It was done to create a better benefit. So that's just an explanation for what happened at Wolf. What I think is the issue here with the pension plan. There are two things. One is plan design, and one is the looming, not looming, but existing debt, because we have, the Commonwealth, the employer, has not paid its share. In the state, you have a contributory defined benefit plan. The employee contributes about 30% of the plan, and over the last 10 to 14 years, the employee has been contributing religiously to that pension plan. The employer, the Commonwealth, on our behalf, has not. They have not been paying everything they should have paid. So now we're at a point where we're looking at what we can do about it, because it is getting increasingly unaffordable. I know we're parsing words and the semantics mean things to different people, and so is it a crisis? My view is it's not a crisis yet, but it will be if we keep kicking the can down the road. We've focused on the pension plan design phase of this. There's an act that was passed 4 years ago with a compromise with the employees, the unions, and the legislature and the governor that actually changed the plan design, that actually did reduce the benefit. But I think by a lot. You know, we can argue whether it did or didn't, but I think I certainly would have blushed to present this kind of a compromise to my employees. But that was done. What wasn't done in Act 120 was to make sure that the Commonwealth was paying everything that it should pay to adequately fund the pension plan. And so over the years, what we've had happen is what happens when you have credit card debt. If you don't pay the bill, next month's balance actually increases. That's what's happened in our pension plan. And every year that we don't pay enough, and we're not paying everything we should pay, the balance due goes up. It's a debt. So it's a stubborn problem. And as you point out, it's getting more expensive every time we kick the can down the road. So I'm willing to listen to, I mean, there are ideas, original and innovative ideas coming out of the legislature, Republicans and Democrats. And this is one of those things we're all going to have to work together. We're going to have to link arms and say, how are we going to pay this debt in a way that doesn't swamp the taxpayer? And I'm willing to look at fresh ideas on that. What I'm not willing to do is kick the can down the road. If that's what you meant by courageous, I'll be that courageous governor. We're not going to kick that can down the road. We are going to be able to afford the pension that we have, so that we have good public sector workers and teachers. But I'm not going to kick the can down the road, and I will be open to good suggestions as to how we do this. I'm not taking a predisposition to doing this, but I am taking a predisposition to the idea that we are going to do it now. We're not going to kick the can down the road. That's my plan. Thanks for asking. Any other questions? Yeah, Bill.
David Rusk studied our community on a number of occasions, and one of his prescriptions for York County is for us to understand that housing policy is school policy. Expanding affordable housing options improves educational performance, according to Rusk. And my question is Rusk's prescription still relevant to York County, and is it also relevant to the statewide?
Yes and yes. Now, is that a softball question? Because
no.
I was head of Better York when David Rusk came to town, so I take partial responsibility for bringing him. And what the frustration that brought David Rusk to town was the city administration and Better York that worked together on that, was because all of us, and many of you here in the room, are struggling with what are we going to do about the city that we love. I mean, we're meeting right now in the city of York. And I have never seen an organization, Better York was an organization that was one place, we never talked about party identification. I'm pretty sure there were a lot more Republicans on Better York's board than there were Democrats, but we were all engaged in trying to do the right thing for the city of York. And so we brought David Rusk in not to look for somebody who was a marketing genius who was going to say, yeah, well, put this sign up here, or do that over here, or get this special deal around here. What is it fundamentally that makes it so tough for third class, actually second and first class cities to survive in places like Pennsylvania? And there are some specific things about the way we organize our governance system. There's some specific things about the way we do zoning and planning, things like that. And he had some great ideas about building a good game on the inside, which I think we have here in York. Good organizations devoted to trying to make this community better. But there's the outside game that really is important. And the outside game includes what are we going to do about education? Because one of the things, I think the Philadelphia Inquirer had a survey of millennials in Philadelphia. who are flocking to Philadelphia, by the way. And Pittsburgh is seeing the same thing. You know, in fact, our older daughter is 33 years old, hard to believe. She does not have a driver's license. She's always lived in cities. And she loves that lifestyle where you can go out of your apartment or house and just walk to a restaurant or a store. She likes that. And I think millennials like that. But in Philadelphia, what that survey saw was that 70% of those millennials who love the urban form, once they have children of school age, they're leaving the city. So we have got to figure out how to make sure that we follow through on that promise of a good education, regardless of the zip code. And again, we can't take ideology into this. This is a practical problem. We've actually got to figure this out because we all, as employers, need good employees. We need people who are educated, who are numerate, who are literate, who know how to solve problems. And most of all, who know how to be lifelong learners, who have learned how to learn. And we can't say, you know, you're not in the right zip code. We're not going to teach you that. You know, that's what our economy needs. That's what our society needs. That's what families need. But we're not going to teach you that because you're in the wrong zip code. Well, it doesn't take too many brains to figure out if this is the wrong zip code. I'm going to move when I get kids in school age. That's what's happening in New York. It's what's happening in Philadelphia. It's what's happening in every city in Pennsylvania. And we need to fix it. And so, again, as I said to Jim, I don't know how we fix that. I think one of the things that distinguishes me from a lot of people on the other side of the fence, in my company, when I wanted to fix something, I wanted to do continuous improvement, the first, not the last place I went to my employees. And I didn't try to demonize them. I didn't try to drive fear into the process. I tried to drive fear out of the process. We've done just the reverse in trying to reform education, so-called. So yes, David Rusk is right. We've got to make sure that we do the right thing for our schools in trying to bring our cities back. But one final thing, sort of like the Pennsylvania parable, we need to understand that cities are not basket cases. The city is actually the future of our society. I'm a baby boomer, and I'm getting to the age where I don't want to drive as much as I do. Right now, I live in a small town. I have to drive to get my groceries. I have to drive to do just about anything. I don't like that, and as I get older, I'm not going to like it even more. And so the city is going to be more and more relevant to the lifestyle I want to lead. It's going to be more and more relevant to the lifestyle millennials want to lead. It is already. And I think it's the form dense communities are actually the wave of the future. We've got to figure out how to make the environment that wave of the future exist in much more conducive to that really good urban form. So I'm a fan of the urban form. I think we have work to do. I'm a student and a disciple of David Rusk, and I believe that he's right, that the outside game, a lot of what affects cities like York happens in Harrisburg, and we need a governor who actually is sensitive to the needs of places like York. Any other questions? Oh, no more? No more? I'm getting this. One more? Okay. Yeah.
I work in the field of disabilities, and the system within Pennsylvania, unfortunately, provides disincentives for us to help people get to work. I'm wondering, I haven't seen a whole lot from your platform about services for people with disabilities. I'm wondering if you just could comment on how we can, Pennsylvania's falling behind their peers in other states. I'm wondering how your leadership can help change that.
Yeah. First of all, let me acknowledge that I have been woefully negligent in terms of addressing that issue in my campaign. I apologize for that. The people with disabilities, and you know, we are defining that differently, and I think more expansively now than we ever have. The people with disabilities, we have to make sure that we are accommodating those disabilities at every chance we get. When I talk about a level playing field, I have everybody in mind. And again, this is one of those things that is not, you know, whether it's the disability, disabled community, whether it's people who've been disenfranchised, whether it has to do with gender, sexual orientation. We need to, as a practical matter, not philosophical, not ideological, as a practical matter, we've got to open our society and our economy up, make it as easy as possible to participate. We benefit from that. If more people with more talents come into our economy, we're going to do better, all of us, all of us. And that means Pennsylvania can't be seen as this closed shop that is only open for a few people. That it's open, it is really open for everybody, people with disabilities, everybody. Again, I'd like to have my two daughters come back to live in Pennsylvania. They're both really talented. They don't see opportunity here. And so when we talk about, you know, opening up, accommodating people with disabilities, We're not talking about something that, oh, let's do that because it's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. And I think that's what we need to recognize in this campaign. I want to recognize it, that from a practical point of view, some of the things that we spout off at campaign time and don't really seem to believe, we need to believe. We need to follow through on those things and actually make them work. And I apologize for not doing a good enough job in my campaign. I'll do better if I'm elected governor. All right, hey, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Tom, it has been our club's pleasure and our joy to welcome you back. And we ask you to accept this small token of our appreciation. It pales beside a Paul Harris Fellowship, but nevertheless, we're grateful to have you back and wish you well. Thank you. Next week, our speaker will be past District Governor Alan Smith, who will kick off our Rotary Foundation quarter and give us an update on Rotary's fight against polio. See you next week.